Hello, hello everyone. Good morning to you. Hope you're having a great day. All right, there we go. As far as I can tell, everything is functioning properly. If you all can hear me, please let me know. We will go ahead and get started. Today is Wednesday. Wednesday is a fun day because I feel like you get back in the swing of things on Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday you can hit the ground running. I cannot hit the ground running today. As you see, I'm wearing my adult clothes because I have to go to an alternate board meeting, which is a meeting of me and a few other business owners around New York City. And we try to give each other advice and give each other tips. Every month you present a problem, and you also present successes and failures and whatnot. But you try to present a problem and get their advice. And really, I don't know if I have many questions this week or this month because things are going pretty well. So that's good. It's always good when things are going well. Tony and Lewis on YouTube. Good morning. Hello, YouTube. Hello, Fernando on Facebook. Hello, everyone on Instagram. Hope you're having a great Wednesday. I was sent an email, something along the lines of there were 10 people left in a tournament, maybe 9, doesn't make a difference. 5 people get paid. And in this scenario, the hero is third in chips with about 40 big blinds, okay? He opens from second position with pocket queens to 3.5 big blinds. First things first, do not open that big. That is a big mistake, raising that big. If you make big raises like that on a regular basis, what's going to happen is your opponents are very likely going to defend with only good hands. This is a mistake a lot of recreational players make because they are used to playing tiny stakes cash games where everyone makes huge raise sizes. They just think that's what they're supposed to do, and it's not. So, anyway, he made it 3.5 big blinds. Folds around to a player who just got moved to the table because they just got to the final table. He had no reads on him. Our hero made it 8,000 at, I think, 2,400 big blind. And then the villain made it 28,000. And the hero in the email said, wow, he made this gigantic re-raise. But really, it's only 3.5 times the last bet, right? It's the exact same thing that hero just did. So it wasn't actually that big. Gets back around to hero. What does hero do with his 40 big blind stack? Well, it seemed like a no-brainer all in to me. And I'm sure hero shoved and he lost, which is why he sent me this email. But that is a spot where you just have to be fine with losing your money. Yes, you're going to lose your money sometimes. Yes, you're going to go broke sometimes, and it's okay. So that's not a spot where people are going to be bluffing all the time. And today, that's what we're going to talk about. Are a few common spots where people typically are very rarely bluffing until you get to the high stakes. When you get to the high stakes games, people will be bluffing some portion of the time, all the time, just because they're good, right? That's just what good players do. They're at least somewhat balanced in almost all scenarios against other decently good players. So, what are some spots where people are not bluffing? Well, first things first, when people check min raise on the turn or the river, that is almost never, ever a bluff. You're going to find that, especially in small and medium stakes games, people may be overvaluing, right? Like say they have, I don't know, king, queen on the board of king, 7, 4, 2. They may check min raise the turn with king, queen. They're thinking it's the nuts. But in that scenario, almost no one is stone bluffing when they check min raise you. It's just not going to happen. So and again, this is presuming our opponents are not so good. If they're world-class players, then sure, they could be bluffing you. But against the vast majority of people in this scenario, they just will not be bluffing you. They're going to have the nuts. Am I going to LAPC this year? Absolutely not. I'm having a baby. There's a chance I may, but probably not. The chance is very tiny. What are my thoughts on America's Card Room? I don't know. I don't play there. I'm sure it exists, though. You love Monday's coffee. Great. What should you bring to the table for your first WPT? You should bring a jacket. You should bring food. I think I mentioned this, didn't I? Or for your first big tournament. You need to bring a jacket in case it's cold. You need to bring some food in case you get hungry. You need to bring, ideally, healthy food that will sustain yourself. If you know there's a tournament at, say, noon and a tournament at 5 p.m., and you know if you bust the noon one, you'll play the 5 p.m. one, maybe you take something to keep yourself entertained, like a book or an iPad. Maybe you bring headphones if you use headphones. Maybe you bring sunglasses if you use sunglasses. Really, just think about what you need. And really, you don't need much. It's actually kind of liberating to be able to go to play a poker tournament as if it is your job, and you don't need anything. You literally need nothing besides money. You need money. It seems like a lot of people at the PCA brought tablets. I mean, listen, do not play on a tablet at the table. That's just silly, unless you don't care about the tournament, right? In my opinion, you need to be focusing on the task at hand, not browsing the internet because you're so bored playing a humongous tournament. Did I see the ace-queen fold? If so, would you make the hero fold? No, absolutely not. The opponent there was a guy named Athanasios, very good player. A bit maniacal, if anything. Don't fold to maniacs. Going back to this, I mean, a lot of people think that if you make a fold that happens to be right, that it was a good fold, right? And the answer to that is no. Just because a fold is right does not mean it is good. It might be lucky, but unless you have some sort of sick read on your opponent, and again, Athanasios is a good player. He's not a fish, right? It's not like he's some weak type player who never puts a chip in the pot without the nuts. That actually wasn't what I was talking about in this topic at all. This topic was sent to me 2 weeks ago. But you have to understand that just because a fold is quote-unquote right this exact time does not mean it is right in general. And now, funny enough, I just said when people check min raise the turn of the river, they tend to have the nuts. I don't know exactly what bet sizes were used in that hand. Like, let's say on the river you bet 3/4 of your stack and then your opponent check raises all in, and your opponent's good. Probably not bluffing, right? Very, very few bluffs in that scenario, especially when it's just so obvious you are, especially if you're value betting. Lewis says, what bluffs could he have had? I don't know what bluffs he could have had. I didn't watch the hand thoroughly, but I know that she had the second nuts, and when you have the second nuts, you don't fold the second nuts. Because that presumes your opponent has exactly the nuts, and if your opponent has exactly the nuts, then they're probably not very good. Or they think you're very bad. One of the two. They're playing an exploitative strategy if they only have the nuts. Anyway, I believe the board was ace, queen, queen, something, something, right? So aces was the only hand the person lost to. And there's one combination of aces and a whole lot of combinations on ace, queen, queen. I don't know exactly what the board was again. There's ace, queen, queen. There's king, jack. There's jack 10. There's king 10, etc., etc. That's all irrelevant. I'm not going to be discussing this hand because I think it's not that big deal. So the 3-bet was to 37K. Her river bet was 50K and it had 150 behind. Oh, I would never fold to 150K. Absolutely not. If it was 50K and then the all-in was for like 68K, you could consider it. Because then it's just like so obvious your opponent can't have any bluffs. When your opponent's river bet is 150K more, they can certainly have bluffs there. Action went check, check, bet, call, check, bet, jam. Yeah, don't fold there. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Okay, anyway. Generally, small stakes players, when they go bet, bet, jam, say they raise pre-flop, they bet the flop, they bet the turn, they jam the river. In that scenario, very often people are not bluffing there either unless they are on the more aggressive side. If you're playing against a generally tight, aggressive player, they may be overvaluing something like top pair marginal kicker, like say they raise king jack and it comes king XXXX. They may go bet, bet, jam with that, but they're not going to be bluffing there either. Now, the good players are almost always going to be polarized whenever they go bet, bet, jam. And polarized means they either have the nuts or they have nothing. And the nuts means the effective nuts, the nothing means effective nothing. You may find them turning bottom pair into a bluff sometimes if it makes logical sense. But in those scenarios, usually people are not going to be bluffing too much if they are weak and straightforward. So, I mean, say you go play a big tournament for the first time, and you see someone who you know satellited in the first level, 3-betting pre-flop or 4-betting pre-flop, betting the flop, betting the turn, and jamming the river. That person's not bluffing. You need to be folding almost everything. Let's see. Just bought Mastering Small Stakes No Limit Hold'em, and you love it. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Do I recommend playing small pocket pairs early in a tournament under the gun, 2 and in middle position? Yes. Even though it's definitely not GTO. The small pair should pretty much always be folded from early and even middle position. Funny enough, if you look at what the solver suggests, they'll suggest folding like pocket 2s in the cutoff. Just like open folding pocket 2s on the cutoff. Maybe even the button against aggressive people. And that's because it just flops so poorly, right? Especially once stacks get a little bit shallower. Like 50 big blinds, it just plays so poorly. So I think a lot of people for forever have overvalued pairs because, hey, pairs and ace-kings are flips. So if they're flips with ace-king, it must be a good hand. But it's just not a good hand. They completely lack playability. If you have a question about my book, should you send an email or use the float the turn form? Send an email to support@pokercoaching.com if it is a question that does not demand an essay to be responded to. Let's see. Good morning from New Jersey. Hello, hello. Say someone raises pre-flop and everyone folds. You call and miss the flop and he bets half pot to full. Is this a sign of weakness? Continuation betting is not a sign of weakness unless you know your opponent doesn't bet with their good hands. And most people bet with their good hands. So whenever people continuation bet, it's either a sign of a range advantage, meaning their range should just be stronger than your range, or it's the sign of them betting with a polarized range, in which case they either have a really good hand or a draw. You should definitely watch my video, El Presidente, when to continuation bet and how much. You can find it on YouTube. Go there, watch it. It's only 15 or 20 minutes long, and it'll explain to you when to continuation bet and how much. Let's see. I posted on Instagram and I believe Twitter some hands from the push-fold quiz, the float the turn push-fold quiz. You can find that in the app stores at FTT Poker at the moment. Maybe changing in the near future. But we had sixes under the gun with, I believe, 12 big blinds. Do we think this changes at micro stakes tournaments where people overfold when short stacked? You should be shoving more if your opponents fold more often. I believe the sixes were a shove under the gun, by the way. So if they're a shove under the gun, and you think your opponents are going to fold more often, then you should definitely be shoving. If your opponent's going to be calling more often, you should be more inclined to fold. We mentioned balancing bluffs and value bets. It's not entirely binary. On wet boards, your bluffs should have way more equity. That's correct. Does that mean you could have more bluffs? Yes, typically it does. As your bluffs have more equity, you get to bluff with more bluffs. The point, like, imagine you have a straight flush draw. That's essentially not a bluff, right? And this is why you see very often you're able to continuation bet when you just have a range advantage, because even your bluffs have equity. Like, say you raise under the gun, big blind calls, it comes jack 4-2. You just have a huge range advantage there. And even your king queen and ace queen, etc., all those hands, even if they're not necessarily getting called by a lot of worse hands, they still have plenty of equity even when they do get called. Is 85% continuation bet a good amount? It depends on the situation. And probably not. It's probably too high. Unless your opponents fold too much. I wrote in my first poker book, Secrets of Professional Tournament Poker, Volume 1, you should continuation bet 100% of the time because in today's games, people fold way too often. Now, that book was 8 or 9 years ago at this point, and I don't think people fold too often anymore. They figured it out. That said, I do think bet jamming is quite good. I'm a very big fan of firing 3 street bluffs at this point in poker, and that's because people fold too often. And as I just said, when people go bet or bet jam, they usually just have a good hand. That makes it a good spot to bluff, right? Discussing like when people check min raise you on the flop, it's well known that check min raises are pretty great if your opponents are not going to defend nearly often enough. And quite often they won't. You have a question about hand? Oh, so same question. Okay. Let's see. 7-2 says, yes, the concern is that if you shove with sixes from early position, you only get called by hands that dominate you. Well, first off, they're going to call with ace, king, ace, queen, ace, jack, etc. But what it amounts to is your opponent should not call your jam with pocket fives, ever. That would be a terrible call in all positions. So you're shoving because your hand stands to be better than all the random hands at the table, and you're going to make hands that have equity fold. It gets through very often. That's exactly what you say, and I agree. What's the last large tournament I played besides the World Series of Poker? That was a long time ago. World Series of Poker was in July. Last tournament I played was the Party Poker Caribbean Poker Party. They had a 25K, a 10K. I bricked all of them. That was fun. The tournament before that was a World Poker Tour event in Montreal. I took 8th place, which paid 100K, which doesn't pay the bills, but keeps us going. What's the best way to learn about hand ranges? Check out my book. Where is it? Here it is. Mastering Small Stakes No Limit Hold'em. Go get it. You can get it at jonathanlittlepoker.com/mastering. You can get the audiobook version completely for free on Audible at jonathanlittlepoker.com/free if you never signed up for Audible. Also, study at pokercoaching.com. We have a ton of interactive quizzes and challenge questions that will essentially ensure you understand ranges very, very well. And you can sign up for that for free for a week. Where's the little guy? I have two little guys. One of them's eating lunch and the other one's taking a nap. What do you think about delayed continuation betting? Sure. Why not? Isn't balanced overrated given most players are playing their cards and not paying attention to how you're playing? You need to start from a point of balance and then understand how to take advantage of your opponent's mistakes. Also, I don't think everyone's just playing their cards. Unless you're playing against really, really bad players. But you need to understand how to play fundamentally well so you can adjust to take advantage of whatever the opponents are doing wrong. If you don't understand what to do, if your opponents are... if you don't understand what to do if your opponents are betting too often, let's say, you're not going to know how to adjust and take advantage of that. Do you recommend playing the speed games or normal ones? Depends on what your goals are. Let's see. You never getting value on the river when you triple barrel. Complain about it until you realize you could just bluff all the time. Yeah, exactly. People forget with calling stations that they end up getting to the river with absolute garbage. Yeah, I mean, calling stations get to the river with garbage and they can't defend. So, bet jam is quite good. Lewis says you lead every time. You should have a decent board when you're in the big blind, like Jack 8-7. That's probably okay. I typically don't do it because you don't actually have a range advantage. Very often you're closer to 50-50 against your opponent's range. And you really shouldn't be leading all that often when you're 50-50. So, no, I typically don't do that, but it probably isn't that bad. You have a book that's specifically geared towards tournaments. Secrets of Professional Tournament Poker, Volume 1. If you straddle the button, should you? Depends on your opponents and usually when you're just deep stacked. Yes, anyone of my kids is eating lunch already? No, he's eating breakfast. Is James awake to say hi to his fans? He's having breakfast. What do we think about pros dumping off money to amateurs? What do you feel about pros dumping money into the amateurs just to dump it off 2 hours into high roller events? I have no clue what you're referring to. I presume that professionals are not trying to give away their money. They may be running bluffs, but they're not going to call with the nut low on the river, I don't think. And if they are, then they're colluding. At what level of play does balance become a factor? I think you have to understand that you need to learn to play well. Why would you not want to play? Why would you not want to know how to play good poker? I think a lot of people don't understand what balance means and how to develop implementable balanced strategies, which is what we teach at pokercoaching.com. And go there, you'll see. If you've not gone to pokercoaching.com and done the homework questions, then I have no excuse for you. You haven't done your work. People buying into events just for social media hype. I don't know who is doing that or what you're saying. Is it a tax write-off or something? I think whatever your mindset is not accurate because no one is buying into a big tournament to give away the money. All right, let's see. Did we see the big fold? Was it too tight GTO-wise? Yes, you should never fold the second nuts. What was the optimal line? Bet the river and then call it off. We discussed that at the beginning of the show. Apparently that's a big deal when people make folds. I don't really get into that kind of thing. People make big folds all the time. People especially make big folds whenever they are playing in tournaments that are way too big for them. And, sometimes you make the quote-unquote right fold, but that doesn't mean it was good. What's the answer to the queen-queen question? Check or bet small? One of the two. A lot of pros have been flatting with ace-queen in the big blind versus all positions. Can we explain that? You don't have to 3-bet your best hands from out of position. You probably should 3-bet. But calling's fine. Calling keeps your range strong. Keeping your range strong is always a good thing. You've seen in many of my books that I suggest betting 100% of the time, since that's not balanced. Yes, you need to understand fundamentally sound poker. If you understand fundamentally sound poker, you would know from playing with specific players, and most players, that their biggest mistake is they fold too often, right? So, if people fold too often, what should you do? You should continuation bet 100%. You say, you heard a story that someone got it all in on the second hand. Well, yeah, people are going to get all in on the second hand. That's obvious. It's like in the World Series of Poker main event. Someone busts in like the first 10 minutes every time. That doesn't mean they're giving their stack away. They're not playing for the hype. They probably got coolered. I remember one time who was it? I think it was Nick Schulman. It was a $10,000 tournament at Borgata. And he like just flew in, bought in a little bit late, I think, and then sat down, and then on like the third or fourth or fifth hand of the day, he busted. He had quads versus straight flush, and he just got up and just left. It was very funny to me. It's always funny to bust early, and inevitably you will bust early. I mean, if you play online poker, you know that you're going to bust early sometimes, because if you play a bunch of tournaments in a row, inevitably you're going to get coolered in the beginning. And so you lose. That's it. You know, you're not always going to win. All right, let's see. At What Stakes is in Poker Stars is my latest book effective. If you actually understand everything in Mastering Small Stakes No Limit Hold'em, you will be well suited to play $50 no limit tournaments online, $3,500 buy-in tournaments live. Really, I teach you how to play fundamentally sound and how to adjust. That's all you really need to do to learn to beat poker. Especially if you are playing a pretty good fundamentally sound strategy. If you start playing against the best players in the world, they're going to play a better version of fundamentally sound poker that is way more difficult to implement, but that's not necessary. You have to make sure your strategy is implementable. Have I ever tried 15x potting on the river? I have not. Don't see many people who fold too often at Commerce. Yeah, not at Commerce. It's important to know who you're playing against. Callum says that in the main event of the World Series one time, a guy went broke on the first hand, or went broke early, where it was like quads against the second full house or whatever it was. Yeah, I mean, people go broke sometimes, right? How do you beat loose players? Play better hands than them. If people start off with garbage and you start off with good players, or start off with good cards, you're going to crush them. Did you find low stakes faster and maybe a bit more fun than high stakes? No, I like tournaments with a shot clock. Those are great. Those are fast and fun. And I like playing high stakes tournaments because it's a very... Listen, at the end of the day, I don't think small stakes poker is all that difficult because it's so obvious what people are doing wrong. You just make the adjustments and that's it. Against good players, you're trying to more so think like a robot and try to play perfectly balanced to the best of your ability. And that is way more difficult because you're very often really trying to keep track of all the combinations of hands that your opponents can have, right? If you can beat 1-3 live, you can beat 2-5. I generally agree on that. Any of you on showing up late to a tournament, you should definitely show up late if you think you are bad. If you're bad at poker, you want to play as few hands as possible, right? Like imagine I show up and I get to play... I want to play as many hands as I can because I have an edge. Like at the casino. If you go and you play blackjack, and you know you're going to take $100 there, if you bet $100 one time, you're like 48% to win. That's great. If you go and you bet $1 every hand until you either go broke or double up, I don't know the math, but you're going to go broke 70%, 80% of the time. So would you rather win 48% of the time or 30% of the time? You get to pick. So, if you think you're bad, if you think you're at a disadvantage, you show up at the last second possible, and you should probably play really slowly. It's kind of a bummer. That said, no one really does that. I mean, if you look at the turbo tournaments at the World Series of Poker, they have regular speed tournaments and turbo tournaments. Regular speed 1500s get 4,000 people. Turbos get 1,000. Because no one thinks they're bad. No one thinks, I'm going to go buy into this tournament, and I'm just going to give my money away. Because that's what you're doing if you're playing with a disadvantage. You are showing up, you're playing the tournament, and you're stone giving your money away. No one thinks they're doing that, so they are overly confident. They think they have an edge. Everyone thinks they have an edge, and that's why poker is a very beatable game. Let's see. If you don't have much time, should you read the book and follow the poker coaching exercises? Yes, you definitely should. All right, let's see. A few more spots for people who aren't bluffing. Pre-flop. Some people just don't 3-bet bluff, right? A lot of people do not 4-bet bluff at all. I mean, I've had so many people come to me for private coaching, and one of the first things I figure out is they just don't 3-bet bluff in the least bit. They literally never 3-bet bluff. And if they don't 3-bet bluff, or 4-bet bluff, what does that mean? That means they just always have good cards whenever they're re-raising. If you always have good cards, your opponents can just easily fold, right? And you may say, oh man, but in my games, my opponents call every time I 3-bet. Okay, so what should you do? You should start 3-betting a much wider linear range of, like, hands like ace-10 suited become very easy 3-bets if your opponent's going to call you with ace-7 offsuit, right? So you can start 3-betting linearly, very wide, with the idea that they're going to call me with all sorts of worse crap, and if they re-raise me, then I get to fold. So, be aware of that. Let's see. On the feature table, a player pushed all in 3 hands in a row for 40 big blinds. Once it was ace-9 suited, once it was something worse, and once it was pocket 10s and got called by jacks. Okay, sure. He just didn't care. Maybe he did care. Maybe he thought that was the best strategy. You know, Lewis, if you think you have a disadvantage, you should be blasting pretty hard. What's a good bankroll to start 2-5 at? Go to jonathanlittlepoker.com/bankroll. I wrote the Bankroll Bible just for you. Hey, Ghost of M in the chat. Welcome. If your opponents are calling your 3-bets, you should watch Alex Fitzgerald's webinar. There you go. We actually have a webinar that Alex Fitzgerald put on just a few days ago. Make sure you get access to that. If you're not on my email list, well, you missed out. You can get on the email list. Easy way to do it and get lots and lots of content is to sign up for your free trial at pokercoaching.com. It requires no credit card, none of that. You just get straight access to the site. Louis Philippe said the Alex Fitzgerald webinar was really awesome. Good, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Bill says, as a rule of thumb, many players believe they have to bluff often, but that's a recipe of disaster. Yeah, I mean, anytime you do anything too much, if you fold too much, it's a recipe for disaster. If you bluff too much, it's a recipe for disaster. If you value bet too thinly, it's a recipe for disaster, right? If you make any play on a very regular basis, you're going to get in trouble unless you're specifically exploiting what your opponents do wrong. Now, whenever I was winning all the WPTs left and right, the opponents folded too often. So, I just raise and bet. I mean, they still fold too often to turn river bets. So, puts your opponents in crappy spots. All right, when else do people not bluff? Some only fire the turn in the river with the nuts. So that's another, we mentioned that earlier where they go bet. But some people in general, if they put a bet in on the turn or the river, they very often just have a good hand as well. So, essentially, you need to figure out who's playing too tightly, right? Your job is to figure out what your opponents are doing incorrectly. And the easiest thing to do is sit there and realize your opponent literally puts no money in the pot unless they have a good hand. Okay, we know this. We've seen this for an hour or two, clearly demonstrated. Now we know we should start making big folds to these players. Now, that doesn't mean we should start folding pocket aces if the opponent bets a turn in the river, because the opponent could be overvaluing with top pair. But at the same time, if you're sitting there with top pair bad kicker, like let's say someone raises, you defend king 5 of hearts in the big blind, it comes king 7-3. You check, they bet, you obviously call. Turn is whatever, name a card. You check, they bet again. Unless it's a king or a 5 giving you 2 pair, you should probably consider folding if you know this opponent doesn't bluff, right? And in that scenario, king 7-2, whatever board I said, there aren't actually any obvious bluffs anyway. So if your opponent's running a bluff, it's with queen jack, right? Ace queen, stuff like that. So if your opponent has to be running a bluff with hands that you just don't even think that opponent would be betting with, you should fold, right? You lose to all the value range. Now you will see some people betting there with pocket queens because they think queens on king something something must be good, which is clearly silly. But be aware that some people just don't bluff, and if they don't bluff, you should be making really big folds. Like folding top pair there against a good player is criminal. You will never be a successful player if you fold top pair there against a good player. But against bad players, you will crush them. And now, when I say bad player, I think a lot of people think bad means a specific thing. Many people think a bad player is someone who spews off their stack. They associate bad with being maniacal. I more so associate bad with doing anything that's very far from fundamentally sound. And if you fold too much, for example, then that's bad. If you bluff too often, that's bad. But whenever you make a big fold with that king 5, top pair no kicker, you are making a very exploitative play, right? Which means if you don't estimate your opponent's tendency right, they are going to crush you. Whenever you adjust and make a big adjustment, like say you're just bluffing a ton because you think they fold too much, or you make a big fold because you think they never bluff. If you do that, you need to be right about 3/4 of the time on average, give or take. It's a super rough estimation, but your adjustments have to be right about 3/4 of the time. And if they're not, you're going to become a very big loser very quickly. I feel like this is one of the reasons I have a decent bit of an edge even in very high stakes tournaments, because I think I'm pretty good at figuring out how people perceive me. So if I know someone perceives me to be overly tight, I just start bluffing like crazy, and they seem to work a lot. If they think I'm a little bit maniacal, I tend to knit it up a bit, and that seems to work very well, right? Trying to figure out how much I should divulge to you all here. Basically, against the very best players in the world, I just try to play GTO. Against the people who think they're pretty good but are not actually that good, or maybe they're good, they're winning players, but they're certainly not huge winners. Against those players, that's where I really, really adjust a ton, because they think they are, they think they're smarter than they are. And maybe they are smart, don't get me wrong, but I'm aware that they think something about me, and then that's where you can adjust a lot. And then against the weak players, usually they just have an obvious hole in their game that you can pick up on really, really quickly. Let's see. Marquis says, you credit me for changing the way you think about poker. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Hope it's useful. You never know. Let's see. King on the flop. Ace queen hand could have king. Matthew, I don't know what you're saying. Yeah, so those are all the spots. To recap them, people typically are not running big bluffs. And again, I say people. These are tight-ish, reasonable-ish, straightforward-ish players. When they check min-raise you on the turn of the river, they have the nuts. And when I say nuts, I mean effective nuts, a very good hand. Or a slight overvalue, like top pair, top kicker, that they just think they're supposed to raise. When people go bet, jam, in general, they just have a good hand. When some people 3-bet you pre-flop, that's often enough to determine they have a good hand. And some people just never fire the later streets without a good hand. Those are a lot of good spots where you can make exploitative folds if you realize your opponents are those players who aren't bluffing very often. How do you feel about considering 20 big blinds a short stack, shoving it in a tournament? You should definitely play a game theory optimal strategy. Open shoving as the only bet in a open shoving as the only bet with a 20 big blind stack is way worse than having a either open shove, min raise, or fold strategy, or an open shove, limp, or fold strategy. And often you want to be limping in those scenarios sometimes. I'm helping Michael Acevedo, like the foremost game theory expert in poker, edit his book coming out in the near future, and he'll explain all of that with charts. I'm really excited about that. Can you dissect the ace-queen fold? It was only a good fold if the opponent literally is so weak and so tight and so bad that he never bluffs and or overvalues. I don't know why everyone cares. Can you all enlighten me to why you care about people making folds? Maybe this is just me being a cranky old man or something, but I just don't care how people play their hands. It doesn't really matter that much to me. Like, I don't get excited by this. Why are people getting excited by a big fold? Yeah, some people play too tightly. Is that not obvious? I mean, I get the idea that it's cool, but like, what if the fold was bad? Instead of everyone thinking that person's a genius, they would think that she's awful, right? And that's the thing, is that people care so much about the short-term results. And the short-term results are just completely irrelevant, right? A good fold is a win. People are excited because 95% of people would not lay that down because they play better, right? Okay, Ghost Vim says there was a king on the flop as well, so kings were beating ace queen too. Okay, good. And there was a straight flush combination. Oh, well then now we're talking about a much different situation than what you all presented me earlier. So if ace queen is not the second nuts, now it's like the third or fourth or fifth nuts, then it becomes actually a considerable fold. That's like that becomes way easier. That said, against Athanasios, he's tried to bluff me way too many times for me to ever fold. He gets paid by me. Some people are just either so maniacal or a little bit too maniacal where I just pay them off almost every time because they bluff too much and they can't help themselves. That said, sometimes they have the nuts. Let's see. Enjoy the time with my two boys. Yes, I absolutely do. Big folds are like dodging fate. Well, if it's actually the fourth nuts, then it's not even really that big of a fold. What's the exact biggest stack size you open shove with and why? It depends on your position, right? Very obviously, you should shove way fewer chips under the gun than you should in the small blind. From small blind, you can shove 25 big blinds. From under the gun, you can shove 10, right? It's a very different situation. The idea that you should shove with the same stack size from all positions is not a good one. 72 said, what made the ace queen a reasonable fold? Ghost of M here, who I trust to give me good advice, said the board contained an ace and a king and a potential straight flush, right? So it's not like the ace queen was the second nuts and the opponent could have literally one combination of hands that beat her. He could have one aces, three kings, and whatever the straight flush was. So that's 5 combinations of hands now. And he's probably not going to be running any sort of insane bluff in general. Maybe he would. That's the thing. I don't know how crazy Athanasios is. Let's see. Phil Hellmuth's famous quote: "You can dodge bullets." Phil Hellmuth is really good at getting bad players to tell them exactly what he has, what they have. Do I play PLO? I am well competent at PLO. That said, I haven't played it in a little bit, so if I was to play online, I would maybe not do so well anymore. I used to be a winner at 2-4. I played a bunch of hands at 2-4, and I cleaned up short stacking 200-400 until they got rid of it. Let's get into money percentage for live play. Depends on how many people get paid. Ghost of M says it was the 4th nuts. You think you'll have 9s full or lower full house too? You probably don't want to be jamming there for value with a weaker full house. Have I played against Ben CB? I mean, I'm sure I have online at some point. How does your style compare to his? I think it's somewhat similar. I actually like Ben CB's videos. He makes the private videos for the Poker Backing Company, and I'm a little bit of an owner there. So we get to see those videos, and I like the videos. I think they're good. Bane, you're not asking the right question. You say, what is a good in the money percentage? Well, what if 10% of the field gets paid as opposed to 15% of the field, right? If 10% of the field gets paid, you should obviously cash less often than if 20% of the field gets paid. So the question was not necessarily a succinct one. It was, we've had a lot of blanket statements today. Like, how many big blinds should you shove at the most? Not a good question. What is a good cash percentage? Not a good question. We need more information. Right? If 15% of the field gets paid and you're a good player, I don't know. It depends on how your general strategy is too. As you're more loose and aggressive, you'll cash roughly at the same cash rate. I mean, most of the best players are cashing just a little bit more than a break-even cash rate, but they're winning a whole lot more, right? Cashing is pretty irrelevant. I mean, for a long time, you'd see people like Gus Hansen, who would cash like 7 or 8% of the time, yet whenever he cashed, he would win the tournament. It's a good trade. There was no straight flush in that queen's hand. There's the link. We're not clicking on it. Again, I just think it doesn't matter. Yes, people make big folds. Louis Philippe said, she's a good customer for the bet jam. Absolutely. See, that's what that's what I'm looking for. I'm not thinking, oh, what a great fold that was played so well. I'm thinking, wow, you need to check raise that person on the river every time. Dan Legrand, a long time ago, ran I don't know if study's the right word. He looked at some data, and he saw that the biggest losers among people who had played 50 World Poker Tour events or more had the highest cash rates at about 30-ish%, 35%. So if you want to be a big loser, focus on cashing a lot. But yeah, I mean, I like the way Louis Philippe is looking at this. It's not, that was a genius fold. It was, okay, against this player, check, shove, river. Because they fold everything, or they fold almost everything. So you said for years 15% cashing in tournaments is standard. If you're playing GTO, what do you think the realistic cashing is? It depends, right? I don't know. Also, you shouldn't be playing GTO. You should be adjusting to take advantage of your opponents. Also, GTO in tournaments is very difficult to assess, and I definitely don't think anyone has solved that, because many things come into account. Like the stack sizes at the other tables come into account, right? You say if you can min cash 80% of the time, you could win. Yeah, but you're not. I mean, like, again, highest cash rates in soft WPT tournaments was 30-ish%. Among people who, that was their whole idea of what winning was cashing 30%. So I imagine you probably can't cash much more than that. Will it be at the World Series this year? Playing and signing at the book booth? Probably for some. Kenny says, 200 big blinds. You raise ace jack to 3 big blind calls. Jack 8, 7. He checks, you bet 8 big blinds, he raises. You re-raise. I would not re-raise. Definitely don't re-raise the flop. If you do re-raise the flop, you're obviously not folding. All right. I think we're going to pack it up soon. Someone keeps focused on the idea that if you cash 80% of the time, you're doing great. You are, but no one cashes 80% of the time. Again, I'm telling you, people cash 30% at a high amount. That is the ceiling, right? And if 30% is the ceiling, if you're playing purely to cash like these players, where I know these players, they're super nets, and if that's the ceiling, then you're not going to cash more than that. Hypothetical situations are useful, but they also need to have some sort of reality built in as well. Otherwise, it's just irrelevant. What do you think about online cash game playing against players who are extremely tight and folding lots of bad cards? I mean, if people fold lots of bad, if people fold everything, then you just need to be bluffing a lot. Easy game, right? Really, listen, there's only so many things people can do wrong. If people fold too much, you should be bluffing a ton. If they call too much, you should be value betting a ton, right? It's easy. If you waited 15 minutes after the bubble in the PSPC, you got a 10K payout jump. Yeah. Payout jumps are real. That said, 10K payout jump is actually not a lot. It's 0.4 buy-ins, right? It's not actually a ton of money. Very important that you don't play for the payout jumps, especially once you get in the money. You have to realize the first payout jump was from $0 to 45K or whatever it was, right? That's a big jump. The next time you get a 45K jump, I don't know when it is. It's probably like when you're down to 40 people or something, or 20 people. I don't know what it is. So getting that 10K payout jump is very, very irrelevant. Also, from a life-changing money perspective, if you already have 45K in your pocket, let's say you have no money and you get into this event and you have stone $0 to your name and you get 45K, is having 55K all of a sudden now going to drastically change your life? And the answer is no, right? If it's not going to change your life, then you don't need to be really trying to do that. Instead, would winning 5 million change your life? Yeah, it would. So we have our 45K locked up and we need to be trying to win the tournament. That said, if you have like no chips, say you have 3 big blinds, then yes, you should be trying to get the 10K because you're not going to win the tournament. Will I be Borgata? No. I have a new baby. Yeah, I see a question on Twitter. No. Everyone calls the Queen's fold the fold of the tournament. With that sort of attention, it's not surprising everyone gets caught up in focusing on it. Oh, goodness. People focus on the funniest things, in my opinion. Just because someone out there said, oh my god, look at this big fold. I'm sure the commentator said it first, because I'm sure they were covering it, and they're supposed to say, oh my god, this is a big fold. And it is a big fold. Who cares? Sure. It's neat. It's cool. I don't know why 100 people are asking me about it. I'm not going to say it's clickbait, but it's kind of like clickbait. It's like, Do I play World Series of Circus events? No. Go to jonathanlittlepoker.com/travelrake to generally see why I do not. What book do I recommend for 4-8 Limit Hold'em? I have no clue, honestly. Maybe look up Ed Miller's book. It's a red book. I don't even know what it's called. A red 2+2 book. It's very old. I don't know. I'm sure there's something better. But I would tell you to get out of 4-8 limit ASAP. You read something the other day that in Live No Limit, you see, I advocate giving nits no action. Correct. If people are tight, what you should do is you should bluff them a lot in all the small pots, and then if they raise or stick around in a manner that you know they're not folding, you don't put any more money in the pot. Ooh, nasty. Min cash was only 24K. Brutal. Let's see. So 10K over K was a 60K jump. Sure. I did not realize they made it so incredibly flat. That said, well, yeah, 10K is still just 40%, right? Put that in Weekly Poker Hand. So listen, I make a point to not steal anyone's content. I know that, for example, some of the major poker companies will not work with you if you steal their content. And a lot of people think that just because it's on the internet, it must be usable. But I try to not steal people's work if I do not have the right to use it. And I have not emailed PokerStars saying, can I use your content? And maybe I should, but quite often people want a royalty for using their content. And if you just straight steal it, either they will try to shut your channel down or they will never work with you. And I like working with people. So I try to not be a criminal. I learned a long time ago through many, many mistakes that you should do good things, you should do right things, and if you know that a company does not want you to steal their content, you probably shouldn't steal their content. Or as some people say, use the content, right? A lot of people don't view it as stealing, but it is. If you take something that's not yours, you're stealing. And I try to not steal. All right. That's going to be it for the day. If anyone out there runs a poker show and wants me to use their content, let me know. Give me permission in writing, and I will be happy to use it. Stone's Gambling Hall, right? We work with them. They let me use their content, and I'm happy to use their content. So, thanks to them. If you do not already, make sure you go and watch my weekly Poker Hand podcast. If you all like watching poker hands take place, and not just absurd folds, but actually good, fundamentally sound strategy and strategies on how to adjust, find it. It's called Weekly Poker Hand. It's at jonathanlittlepoker.com/WPH. Or you can find it on YouTube. You can find it in the iTunes store, etc., etc. All right. Have a great day. Enjoy yourselves. Be nice to someone. Have fun with the big folds. Don't make big folds yourself unless your opponent's a super, super, super nit. And if they're super, super, super nit, then you shouldn't fold. Can I recommend any books for someone to improve your live reads? Yeah, look up Zach Elwood's work. Reading Poker Tells. What is that book that you have that has daily quotes? I don't have a book written on daily quotes. There's a book behind me called, what's it called? The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. That's about stoicism. To be fair, I don't read it every day. I should be better about that. All right, have a good day. I will see you all again on Friday. We moved what's this show called? We moved a Little Coffee to Monday, Wednesday, and Friday now because life is hectic. Can you spell it again? jonathanlittlepoker.com/WPH, Weekly Poker Hand. And you ask for the book. It's called Daily Stoic, STOIC. All right, have fun. See you all Friday. Enjoy yourselves. Good luck in your game.